The Kitlocker.com Club Series podcast. Talking everything grassroots.
Welcome to another episode of the Kitlocker.com Club Series podcast. This episode's a little bit different this week. It's a little bit more on the generic side, which should be applicable to most sports. I'm Ollie, the host, as you may know by now. I've got Ben Dixon with me, co-host, new business development manager at Kitlocker, and then we're joined today by Mayur. And as always, I'll let Mayur explain his background.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Ollie. So my name's Mayur Ranchordas, and I'm a academic and a nutrition consultant based up at Sheffield Hallam University. So my background is I actually studied sports science at university, and over 3 years I did sport and exercise science, where I studied all the various disciplines around nutrition, strength and conditioning, physiology and biomechanics. And then eventually I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, so I stayed on and I did a master's in physiology and nutrition at Sheffield Hallam University as well. Later on qualified as a strength and conditioning coach. So that's how I started my career. And very quickly I realized that I was doing a lot of nutrition work alongside my strength and conditioning. So I went back and did a diploma. The International Olympic Committee ran a diploma in sports nutrition, so I did that. And then been working as a performance nutrition consultant, advising professional athletes, elite athletes ever since. And then I combined that role with my university role, which is I do a bit of teaching on the sports science degree programs, and I also do a lot of research around what nutritional strategies can athletes do to improve their performance, improve their recovery, what supplements are more effective, which diets are better for performance and recovery. So I kind of split my time now between university and working with athletes.
And just for the benefit of listeners, I think you might be underselling yourself a little bit, Mayur, in terms of like what your pedigree is. Am I right in thinking that you've worked with a couple of Premier League clubs in the past as well?
Yeah, so I've worked with quite a few Premier League clubs. So interestingly, my career didn't start out in football. It actually started out in the English Institute of Sport. So I used to provide nutrition support to Olympic athletes across a range of different sports. And it wasn't really until sort of mid-2000s when I first got my experience in professional football. So I started out my career at Sheffield Wednesday Academy. When I was a student, did a bit of work up there, and then worked with Sheffield United Football Club first team when they got promoted to the Premier League when Neil Warnock was the manager. So this is going back quite a long time. And then I've had various different clubs. So, did a bit of consultancy at Doncaster, Bolton Wanderers when they're in the Premier League. I've done a work with a lot of individual Premier League players, and recently been working with Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club.
Before I get super rigid and start talking about specific topics that I've got written down, I think this is probably quite an interesting thing for listeners is what's changed then? Because Sheffield United, when they got promoted to the Premier League way back when, I remember sitting on the Kop when Sheffield United got relegated actually, which is not ideal, bringing back some bad memories. But what's changed from nutrition then to it's like what you're doing now with Wolves? What's like been the biggest progression, I suppose?
Yeah, good question. I think back in the day, so we're going back sort of 15, 20 years, I think sports nutrition wasn't really established as a discipline where people had jobs. So back in the day, the general fitness coach, might have dabbled in a bit of nutrition, and we didn't really know what we know now. So the science has really evolved, and we know a lot more about what you eat and what you drink, and when you eat and when you drink, and how much of it you have can have dramatic impacts across how you adapt, how you perform, how you recover. And it's the one thing that we know can have dramatic effects on your performance. And I think back in the day, because we didn't know too much about it, people used to engage in probably a lot of word of mouth type strategies, where you have steak for breakfast and People probably really had loads of pasta because they thought, pasta gives you energy, so I need lots of it. Whereas I think we now realise that we're all different, and the positions that we have on the pitch, they have different roles. So, for example, a centre-back doesn't cover as much high-intensity distance, whereas your wingers and your box-to-box midfielders might have to be quicker and they burn a lot more energy. So the way they eat has to be very different. So because that science has evolved, and because we now have practitioners whose full-time job is to work with nutrition, we have chefs that know more about it. So everything's weighed to some degree, everything's measured, everything, is scientific. And it's like anything, isn't it? As your knowledge evolves and the more you know about something, the better you can implement it in the real world. And I think that's the real change, is that we never used to pay that much attention to nutrition. So I think back in the day when you're talking about when Neil Warnock was a manager and Sheffield United were in the Premier League, they probably used to have loads of sports drinks and the odd protein shakes. Whereas now, a lot of the guys will have an individualized plan. They'll get blood taken out at pre-season. Their vitamins, minerals will be bespoke based on their blood work. They'll have heart rates, energy expenditures, how much distance they cover in training, all this data that didn't exist back then. And that can then be used to bespoke nutritional recommendations. So, one guy might be eating 2,500 calories a day, whereas another guy might be eating 3,000 calories because they perform at different levels, and one burns more energy, one burns less energy. So you then have an individualized plan.
Do you think as well, mate, with the development of, I've come from a sports performance background pre my position now, so I dare say I know a little bit. But with the development of such sports like CrossFit, the whole development of clean eating, paleo, and all these kind of protein powders that are starting to come and businesses that are developing to the public eye. Back in the day, it used to be the sports drinks, it used to be Lucozade. It used to be one brand only. And now you can go to Tesco's and they've got a variety of different brands out on sale. The top level performance where you're at, what you see when you walk into your local supermarkets, Tesco's, for example, that's available for youth sport, do you think that's the right kind of product that should be on sale for your dietary requirements? Not necessarily the whole what you eat day in, day out, but the additionals.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think first thing I think a lot of listeners might want to know is people are very quick to jump on the bandwagon of taking supplements and loads of other products that are out there. But what people don't realize is that we use very much a food first approach. So if you eat proper whole foods, so I'm talking about things like, brown rice and wholemeal pasta, things like quinoa, good quality sources of protein like, salmon and chicken, and lots of fruits and vegetables and smoothies. And if your general diet is quite clean, what I mean by clean is avoiding like processed foods, and you're making these foods and you know exactly what is in on your plate when you're eating it, then 9 times out of 10 you've done sort of 75-80% of what you need to do. And then the rest of the supplements, like the protein powders and the energy drinks and the energy gels and things like your caffeine products and your pre-workouts, and they're all just the icing on the cake. If your general diet is really poor, you could take as many energy drinks and protein drinks as you want. Your performance is ultimately going to suffer. You're only making up some deficits. And it's like that across the continuum. So it doesn't matter whether you're at grassroots and beginner level or whether you're at that top end, that food first approach is consistent across that whole spectrum. So making sure that you eat clean, making sure that, you know exactly what you're eating, it's fresh. There's plenty of vegetables, fruits, it's not processed, you're not buying meals that are cooked for you. And my general rule of thumb is, if you can't cook it from scratch or you're not making it yourself with fresh, clean ingredients, then chances are it's probably not going to be good for you.
I like that. Eat your greens, kids.
Yeah.
Love it. So may I say that someone you know, what you just explained there about it being about 80% of, you know, you're doing the right thing just by eating well. What kind of effect on performance does that have? Even if we're talking at like a grassroots level on a competition day or even on a training day as an example, say someone's diet's not the best and you know, they're compared to someone that eats really, really clean. What kind of impact is that going to have, like, between the two, say in a 1 hour, 90-minute session?
Think about it this way, right? So let's say you have two individuals and you've got one person who's eating junk food, they're not eating particularly well, they don't hydrate very well, and they go and they train and they compete in games. And you've got another person that hydrates well, eats really clean, you know, has good breakfast, lunches, dinners, lots of fruits and vegetables. The biggest difference between those two is that every time you train, you cause muscle damage. So whenever you train, you're causing these micro tears in your muscles, which is a natural process because those micro tears then repair themselves. Then you get bigger and stronger, and that's called the adaptation, where your body adapts to that training session and you get better. So it's a bit like, you know, when you haven't done a lot of exercise for a long time, and then you do some exercise, and then your body gets a bit sore, doesn't it? It's called muscle soreness. And the person that eats really clean will experience less muscle soreness. They will adapt quicker. They will get, you know, those adaptations, the muscular adaptations, things that are going on in the cell in the body, that happens quicker and it happens better versus the person who's not having those nutrients. Now, if you take one training session, let's say you train 3 times a week, 3 times a week becomes 12 times a month. 12 times a month becomes, you know, 24 times over 2 months, and then over 100 sessions in a year. It has this compound effect. So just by changing your diet, you can make dramatic adaptations. So by the end of that year, the guy that's eating clean or the girl that's eating clean is going to be way fitter, way superior to the person who's eating junk food all the time. And I think that's what people forget. It's not one meal. You know, you eat 3 or 4 meals a day, and then you eat 20 to 25 meals a week, and then you're eating hundreds and thousands of meals over time, and each one of those meals counts because they have direct impact on performance.
I guess it's just a bit of it's an investment, isn't it? Food's an investment into better performance.
It is. It's the equivalent of, let's say you gave it 60% in a training session and you could have tried harder, but you didn't, versus you giving 100% at a training session. The person that's going to give 100% at a training session is going to get fitter, aren't they? They're going to get better. And nutrition's the same. Your body is made up of all these cells that are continually adapting, and you'd never get a car and give it the wrong fuel or not give it enough fuel because it wouldn't get to where you wanted it to go. But your body's the same. So if you're putting poor fuel and the wrong fuel in your body, you're not going to meet those goals that you're looking to meet because you get to halfway and your body will start breaking down.
Yeah. And you made me never want to eat a chocolate bar or a Pop-Tart ever again.
It's about a balance, isn't it? So we're not talking about you can never drink, you know, Coke, you can never have chocolates and ice creams. You know, of course you can. It's absolutely, you know, all the professional athletes engage in those, you know, we're all human. We love these types of foods, but it's about seeing where they fit. And if you're very active and you're training all the time, then yeah, you could have them the odd time, a few times a week. But if you eat them every single day, then that's the equivalent of putting the wrong fuel in your body, and you wouldn't do that. So it's looking at that bigger picture.
Yeah.
How do you deal? Well, this is assumption coming from the IO, the Institute of Sport you did, with your teenage athletes that are at that elite level, or even alternatively sub-elite level. How did you communicate and work with the parents there? Because that's not just directly related. The athletes aren't in control of the diet there, are they? If they're a 12, 13, 14-year-old athlete. Did you have to work with the parents a lot of the time? Did you do it in groups, and what was the response like?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends on the age group. So I think first and foremost, you have to educate the athlete. It doesn't matter how young they are, because ultimately they're the ones that need to know what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, and importantly, why.
Yeah.
So what are you eating, when are you eating it, well, why are you eating this way? And then the so what. So if I eat this way, this is what's going to happen. So then you've got the buy-in from the athletes. Then it's what I call the enablers. So the enablers are the parents, the people that are providing the packed lunches for schools that are providing the hot meals, evening meals that you get at home. And then it's communicating that message to the enablers. So for example, if the athlete is educated and they go home after a workout or after a training session and they've got chips and burgers on the table that aren't particularly healthy and pizzas, then they can say to the enablers, look, I need fuel that's going to help me recover and make me less sore so I can train harder the next day. And then the enablers buy into it and it becomes that holistic. So we're very quick at saying, we need to educate the athletes, but the athletes in the middle, they're the ones that are the performers. Doesn't matter at what level. And then you've got the coach, you've got the parents, you've got the schools, and all those parties need to be bought into that process so that the school meals they provide are going to be healthy. Otherwise, you go to school and all you've got is chips and burgers and pizzas and unhealthy foods. Yeah, it's like
over there, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like making sure that, and you see this. So when you see sports colleges and sports schools that have all these, they train several times a week, they compete. If you go to their canteens, they realize that nutrition is important. So they'll have loads of healthy salads and quinoa and healthy cereal bars and, the right types of pasta, the right types of chicken and salmon and so on and so forth.
Fantastic.
And I think one of the key things I'd like to dispel here as well is that people look at healthy eating as boring. And it's not boring. It's boring if you just boil a broccoli and you put it on a plate, it's boring. But there's loads of ways to jazz it up. Why don't you have a broccoli where, you steam your broccoli, you toast some almonds, and then you might fry it in a bit of soy sauce and some fresh almonds and some sesame seeds. And all of a sudden you've just made something really boring into something really exciting. The same goes for like a lot of dishes where, being creative by using not all the contemporary cooking methods and recipes and adapting healthy recipes. So an easy one is people love pizza, but we know pizza can be quite unhealthy. But if you took like a tortilla that you normally have as a wrap, and then you just made like a tomato sauce, you made some toppings, a little bit of cheese, and you stuck it in the oven, all of a sudden you've got yourself a really healthy thin-based pizza. It's still a pizza, but you've adapted it to make it healthy.
Yep, I have that quite often. Well, probably at least once a week from Lean in 15 tortilla pizza.
Yeah,
I think places like that are a really good place to look for things like that. My girlfriend is constantly on an app that's got plenty of recipes on it there, which has been quite enlightening actually, because I've been eating a much varied diet now, but it's still been macro friendly. So that's ideal. It's the information's out there, isn't it? It's like when you were saying about how nutrition's changed over 15 years, the accessibility to information around these kind of healthier options are out there now, and a lot of them are free. They're not sat behind a paywall, so everybody should be able to do it if they wanted to.
You're on like adolescents, or even not adolescents, we're referring to young adults, like in improving your skill set, your repertoire of meals. We're weaning my 6-month-old at the moment, and last week she had salmon and potatoes. Just mind-blowing that you're thinking like that kind of, not kind of dish, but it's accessible, and obviously weaning onto it so at such an early age. It's the information's there to be followed.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things about younger athletes is that when you're growing up until the age of 21, especially like young athletes, you've almost got two things. You've got growth and maturation going on. So you need the healthy nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, and the calories for growth and maturation. But then you've also got the calories that you're burning for training and competition. And if you don't eat properly, what we tend to find is that if you're not eating properly, then your growth and maturation is affected because all the calories are going to your training, or your calories will go to your growth and maturation. You're not going to get the adaptations from the training that you're doing. So that's why it becomes really key to, it's not just, eat healthy. You've got two things going on there that you're trying to support.
Yeah, definitely. Ben's already boxed off how you can adapt a better diet for your children, which I think is great that you've already boxed that one off for me. Thanks for that. Moving away from kind of like the youth side, and I'm hoping there's going to be a fair amount of listeners to this, which are going to be, grassroots players like myself that are, mid-20s, 30, 35 maybe. I read something about Wayne Rooney saying it was disgusting that he had to shovel pasta down his throat at 11 o'clock for a match. It's quite funny when when he was paid, I haven't much he got paid. What kind of effect does pre and post match nutrition have at a grassroots level? Like in terms of how much emphasis do you need to put on it and how much should you be putting on it?
Yeah, I think these stories are always interesting about, having passed it 11 o'clock. And I think what he's referring to then is different kickoff times. So typically in professional football, you have kickoff times at midday, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, which is your typical kickoff time for most games, and then 5 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and so on. So how you eat will change. So obviously if your kickoff is at night, then you've got breakfast and lunch and your pre-match. Whereas if your kickoff is at 12, then you only get one meal, which is your breakfast, as an opportunity. So that will make a big difference. So that's what Wayne Rooney was referring to then. But even at grassroots level, you're still going to be training several times a week, and you might be competing once a week. And it's thinking about, if you're busy at work and you've got training that day, then start thinking about your training earlier on. So what you're going to have for breakfast and for lunch that's going to fuel you for that training session. And I think that's what people get wrong, is that they'll think about the training too late, and then they've probably eaten the wrong breakfast, or they might have skipped breakfast and had a really quick lunch, and then they're lacking some energy during that training session. So it's, think ahead, because the energy that you get for the activity is almost never what you eat 3 hours before. Yeah. It's almost always what you've eaten in the morning or the night before. So it's making sure that you've got your plan, plan when your training sessions are, plan when your matches are, and then when you know when that occurs in your diary, you can start planning your nutrition accordingly. So for example, if you've got a kickoff at 12 and you're not a massive fan of pasta, then that's fine. 3 hours before, 2 hours before, have some porridge or some cereal instead with some banana. It doesn't have to be pasta. And similarly, if you've got a kickoff on an afternoon on a Saturday, then start thinking about what you're eating on the Friday rather than just a Saturday. So it's that, looking at that preparation.
Yeah, and I think there's one common denominator there, and for people that are maybe not as, clued up on nutrition, is that it's a carbohydrate source that's, that you need to be emphasising there. So yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Like I'll play at 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So I get up really early and, have a bagel or cereal or whatever for that reason. I don't know why when I play in goal, but it's still, you probably got to practice what you preach, don't you, I suppose.
I think what's important that listeners will want to know as well is there's this concept in nutrition that we call it periodizing your diet, and it's called, periodize your food. So if you have a rest day where you're not burning any energy, then you probably don't need to have a lot of carbohydrates. There's not a need to have lots of pasta and rice and cereals and bread, because these foods provide you with energy. Because you're not burning any energy, withhold some of those foods and eat more fruits and vegetables and proteins and healthy fats. But on the days where you are burning the energy, you put more of those foods in. And then likewise, let's say you played a game on a Saturday or a Sunday, you need to elevate your protein foods, because protein helps your body recover. And they don't have to come from protein shakes. If you have a meal that's quite high in protein, then that's absolutely fine.
And just, actually, Ollie, you lead on to the one. I've got a question on my own, but I'll bring that in. We'll get through these.
Cool. One other thing that I just wanted to mention that I have got written down is there's obviously the big number 18, when you get to 18 years old, you're obviously, people's priorities change, and like in terms of drinking and going out, socializing. A lot of grassroots players, and I've found myself in similar situations before, where I've turned up at a football pitch on a Saturday or a Sunday morning, and, and someone comes in the stinking of ale. What kind of impact does that have? Say if you've drank like the night before, on your energy in that in that compete kind of like 90-minute time frame.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. I've just got someone at the front door.
No worries.
I'll be 2 seconds.
No worries.
Joys of working from home and people knocking on your front door.
No worries. No.
Yeah, so going back to this question about drinking alcohol the night before, think about it this way. When you drink alcohol is a diuretic, so it dehydrates you. So if you've had quite a few alcoholic drinks, your body's going to dehydrate. You're going to lose a lot of water. But then alcohol also uses a lot of carbohydrate to process in the liver. So essentially what you're doing is you're fatiguing your body the day before it needs to be rested. So chances are, if you've been drinking, you've had a late night, you're dehydrated, you're not going to sleep well, and all that has negative consequences for the day of a game, for example. Does that make sense?
What you're saying is, do not drink the night before.
I think maybe having 1 or 2 drinks isn't going to hurt, but having 4 or 5 is probably not advisable.
Save it for after you've played and scored and won. Then maybe enjoy yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it all depends on professional athletes. So let's say, go back to Premier League. You play on a Saturday, and you might have to play on a Tuesday. And if that's the case, you only have this short 48-hour window to recover, rehydrate, refuel. So you probably wouldn't do anything to compromise that. But if you were playing Saturday to Saturday, you now have many more opportunities to recover. So it's that puts it into really nice context, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Ben, I know that you're itching to ask a question, so go ahead.
I wasn't questioning. I was just going to give a comment regarding don't turn up and watch a Sunday League game if I was you, because there's more than 4 or 5 alcohol drinks been consumed the night before there.
Yeah.
One thing, Mayur, that I did want to, obviously I'm just conscious of time. One thing that I think has risen to prominence in the last few years is obviously, the use of gels and half-time aids and that kind of thing. We don't sell energy gels at work, so I guess I'm all right in asking this and being completely open and honest. They're not particularly cheap. If you go into a supermarket and buy them as a single gel or bar or whatever, rather than like putting a percentage on it, what kind of effect do they have? Should you be keeping your money in your pocket, or should Tesco be a stop on the way to game day?
Yeah. I think a lot of people want that holy grail answer, don't they, to energy drinks, energy gels. I get asked about caffeine. Can I take caffeine before? Can I take some carbohydrate gels at half time? I think the simple answer here is, if you've eaten properly the day before and the day of the game, then 9 times out of 10, a lot of these products at grassroots level, they're probably not going to have a major impact. Mm-hmm. I think if you've not eaten particularly well, or you feel like you need a bit of an energy boost, then there is good evidence that these energy gels do work. So one of the bits of research that's been done is around carbohydrate in the mouth. So your mouth has these sensors, they can sense carbohydrate, and when they can sense carbohydrate, it sends signals to the brain, and then your brain can work a little bit harder. And if you skipped breakfast, or you've not eaten well that day, then that can have even more of a pronounced effect. So in those scenarios, these energy drinks and these gels certainly work. But then you might have scenarios where, let's say your game is on a Sunday at 3:00 and it might be 23 degrees. And in those scenarios, your sweat rate might be quite high. You might be losing a lot of electrolytes. So in those cases, yeah, completely, these energy drinks are absolutely necessary to, but in most cases, you probably don't need it. But then it's a convenience thing. So let's say you finish a game and then you've got to drive home and you can't get access to a good meal. Well, in those cases, a protein shake and a protein bar and all that can be really convenient because you can't access a meal within that golden hour of recovery.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, they do work, but I think it's not replacing them ahead of a good fueling strategy before, during, and after.
Yeah.
So a lot of my players I work with in a Premier League level, they're not a fan of energy gels, and they'd rather have half a banana. And it's like everyone's individual personal preferences. But a football game is 90 minutes, and if you're performing at a high level where you're covering a lot of distance and a lot of high intensity distance, then an energy gel at half time probably isn't going to do you any harm.
Yeah.
And you've also got that added effect of the psychological benefit. If you've took one, you've had a good game, or you've had a good swim, or whatever event or sport you're playing in, something succeeded, you may attribute that back to the energy gel, and you want to continue that going forward as well.
Yeah.
Which you can't really stop. Well, that mental link, that association is always going to be there.
Yeah, it's a bit like, the way to think about it is if you went out and did a 5K, you probably wouldn't start downing a load of sports drinks and energy gels during and before, because most people can do a 5K in half an hour or just over or under. If you went out and ran 10 miles, you might want to start thinking about energy gels and energy drinks, because the longer the event and the more high intensity the event, the more energy you use, and therefore the more energy you need to replace.
Yeah, I go out on my mountain bike, and when we get 30-40k away and you've got to come back, I always I take one of the SIS gels. But the problem is I've been taking the ones that you're supposed to mix into 500 milliliter of water, but I didn't realise that I'm just squeezing it straight in, and it's like the sourest. You're supposed to mix it with half a litre of water. Oh wow, it knocks you out. It's great.
Yeah.
Pure sugar.
Mayur, just going back to one thing, and I think this is something that I definitely don't put enough emphasis on personally, is when you're talking about nutrition, is the hydration side and water. And you're saying about properly hydrating when you wake up and whatnot. How important is that?
Yeah, I think one thing that people don't realize is that we're all very different when it comes to hydration. So let's say you take two people, and one person can probably lose a lot of electrolytes in their sweat, but not a lot of water. So your sweat rate might be quite low, but you might lose a lot of salt and magnesium and potassium, for example. And you might have another person that loses a lot of water, so loses a lot of sweat, but doesn't lose a lot of electrolytes. And you can easily measure that. So you might not be able to measure your electrolytes so easily, but you can measure your sweat rate just by weighing yourself before and after doing any exercise. And if you've got a high sweat rate, so for example, if you've gone out and done a 30-minute run and then you've lost a kilo, that's a litre of water. That's quite a high sweat rate. So if you've got a high sweat rate, you need to drink more. If you're a salty sweater, because on your clothes, you tend to get these white marks, and you get these white marks on your face when your sweat dries. And if that happens, you're a salty sweater. It means you lose lots of electrolytes in your sweat. And in those cases, you might need some electrolyte tablets and some extra electrolytes. But the general rule of thumb is around 8 to 10 cups of water a day. But people always, forget that things like teas, coffees, herbal teas, they all count towards your fluid intake. So making sure that you get all that balance. And say if you've got a game and it's going to be warm, start thinking about your hydration the night before, not just on the day of.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's really good, solid advice. Ben, anything you want to add before Mayur needs to run?
Just one thing. I think one thing we've seemed to have covered is pre-competition and fueling for pre-competition. I dare say a lot of the buzzword over the past 10 years has been more around recovery. Not a buzzword, but it's been more around recovery. do you have any top tips? And I don't necessarily mean in meals or products or anything, but do you have a time frame as to when you'd suggest post activity to get a substantial meal in? And if you're driving 2 or 3 hours home, what kind of product would you suggest? I guess you've covered it, but what product would you suggest to get in?
Yeah, great question. So think about it in 2 phases. So your first phase is your 3 R's: rehydrate, refuel, and recover. And the easiest ways to hit all 3 of those is by taking a milkshake, for example. So if you had a milkshake, you can add some protein to it if you wanted to. The fluid has got the rehydrate, the milk's got the refuel, the protein might have the repair. So you've got those 3 R's like boxed off. And then most people lose their appetite after high intensity exercise, but then a couple of hours after it comes back. So making sure that you have a decent meal. So if you're on the road and most people might want to stop off at the services and probably have some burgers and chips or whatever. There are healthier options. You can have a wrap and some fruit, and so making sure that you've got that planned. And then the second phase is the following day. So recovery doesn't just stop on the day of, because things like muscle damage and muscle soreness peaks like 1 to 2 days after. So the following day is just as important. So making sure that you emphasize on a good quality breakfast. And a lot of people tend to skip on protein at breakfast.
Yep.
So people tend to have either porridge or toast, but actually protein is really important. So making sure that you put some eggs in there. Or if you're in a rush, you might have a protein shake along with whatever you have. Things like adding peanut butter to your toast. Having things like smoked salmon at breakfast with an avocado on a slice of toast. That's a really healthy breakfast to have.
Nice, thank you very much. And it's interesting. Have you done a lot of work with Dave Hember as well with the Barbell Club? Because I was in the Barbell Club a few years ago, one of the founding members, and we had the nutrition strategy, and it was that. So I wasn't sure if you've given Dave anything like this in the past, and he's just used it.
Yeah, I've known Dave for a long time, so I'm sure we've stolen each other's ideas over the past.
It was interesting. The 3 R's then just like, whoa, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a perfect soundbite as well for people. There's been some fantastic ones in this anyway, so yeah, Mayur, appreciate your time, and the knowledge has been pretty overwhelming. So I think we'll be listening back to this ourselves, let alone putting it out there for listeners. So yeah, really appreciate your input.
Mayur, just one more final one from me. Well, two from me. Ollie, do you want to?
Mayur's got to go.
I know. Chef Wednesday, you'll also know Nick Ward from UKSCA around Sheffield. Was you working with Nick at Wednesday when he was there?
What year was that?
He was the S&C coach under, I can't think he was under, I think he was under Turner, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I did work with Nick, yeah.
So Nick was my S&C tutor when I was at Eagles as well. And then
Do you know what? I didn't work with Nick when he was at Wednesday. I worked with him when he joined us at Sheffield Hallam.
Right, yeah. He was living in Dave's apartment.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
It all interlinks. Fantastic.
Brilliant. Great stuff. Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much for the
Thanks,
time.
man. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant. See you soon.
The Kitlocker.com Club Series podcast. Talking everything grassroots.